Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Strand bookstore. My name is Paul, and I'm the communications director here. Thank you. Before we launch into everything, I'll just share a little brief history about the Strand. The Strand was founded in 1927 by Benjamin Bass on 4th Avenue's Book Row, right over there, which has stretched from Astor Place to Union Square and has now dwindled to just the Strand. We are the sole remaining bookstore that used to be there during that time, during Book Row time. And it's now run by third generation owner Nancy Bass Wyden, and we want to thank all of you for all your support. Without the loyal community of book lovers, theater lovers, writers, we would not be here today. And tonight, we are thrilled to host Kait Kerrigan to discuss her Broadway debut, The Great Gatsby. Obviously, now on Broadway. Follow at Great Gatsby, of course. I want to see all those phones out. Kait is making her Broadway debut, as I said. Other musicals include The Time Traveler's Wife in the West End, and the book lyrics for The Mad Ones, and Henry and Mudge off Broadway. Other recent plays and musicals include Father-Daughter, Indigo, and Justice. And joining Kait is Brendon Henderson, founder and director of Wait in the Wings, a YouTube channel dedicated to preserving the cultural history of theater. Recently, Wait in the Wings told the story of The Vegetable, F. Scott Fitzgerald's flop surrealist play, including interviews with leading scholars and the esteemed publisher Charles Scribner III. You can check out more of that on the Wait in the Wings YouTube channel. So without further ado, I think please join in welcoming Kait and Brendon.
Check. I feel like a director in this chair. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out and being here in this absolutely gorgeous room. Props to everybody who has the champagne glasses. I was way too nervous to even think about that. But how are you, Kait?
Okay.
How is it coming into, you just froze the show on Tuesday, or soft served it?
We soft served it on Tuesday, we froze it yesterday. And there were a couple changes. Actors had ideas, and we solved those. There were teeny tiny things, but we did have to do a couple more changes today. My script supervisor, we ended up bringing her in for an extra day because of the changes that the actors asked for.
And is it going to be in there tonight?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Little tiny things.
I'm so excited to see it. So I guess the best place to start is, when were you introduced to the Great Gatsby novel?
I think the first time I read it was when I was in 11th grade. I had a teacher named Mr. Jones, and we read, it was an American literature course, and I definitely had to write a paper on it, and I liked it. It was not my favorite novel. I was pretty into women's literature at the time, and there was not any women's literature on the syllabus, and I had some feelings about that, and I made them known. But I did like it, and it made an impression on me. And then I re-encountered it when I was in college, when I was at Barnard College, and that was a more friendly environment for me to share my feelings on The Great Gatsby, because it was a women's college.
And how did you do it when you were in college? Because you did your own take on it, didn't you? Did you do an all-feminist reading of The Great Gatsby at one point? I definitely was. I was at Barnard, and so everything we were doing was looking at things through.
There was a lot of looking at things through a feminist lens. So I definitely looked at. I think we all anything that we looked at, we were allowed to sort of take that angle, and we were encouraged to take new angles on books. The thing that I took away from Barnard more than anything, they were really focused on close readings and taking small bits of text and going really, really deep with textual analysis, and actually not going to other sources, but really diving into your own ability to take what's in the text and pull things out of it. And so I think that actually is the thing that I learned at Barnard that was the most valuable to me in the process of writing the show.
Right. And with your take on this too, I can only imagine the pressure of it, because it's really the first time that The Great Gatsby has been a musical. And you know, it was on Broadway before in like 1926, a year after the book was published. We have this play copy.
We were both gifted a fancy new copy. This is a new edition. It didn't exist. I don't think you
It just came out a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
From Anne Margaret Daniel and James L.W. West, who work with the Fitzgerald Society. They went through the Princeton archives and they got it all together. But when that one came out, they changed a lot.
More than I could have ever imagined.
Because when the book came out, it was a commercial flop. Like very few people were reading it, very few people knew about it. And so I wanted to really quick read some of the changes that they had. This is from the book. So the first one is that Nick was no longer the narrator. There was no opening lunch at the Buchanan House, no trip through the Valley of the Ashes, no party at Tom and Merle's Love Nest, no scene at the Plaza Hotel. They didn't have Klipspringer. They didn't have the T.J. Eckelberg billboard. It was just wild changes, but the book was so new that nobody really knew or cared.
And the play did pretty well.
Yeah, it was a commercial smash.
It did better than the book did.
Yeah. But now that we're so far removed from it and it has blown up and everybody has their own opinion on it, how has it been for you trying to juggle A, pleasing the Fitzgerald purists and the people who love Great Gatsby, but then B, taking the book and using it to introduce people who have no idea what the book is?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that are kind of exciting about doing this right now. There's something amazing about having everyone walk in the door, for the most part, with a relationship with this book, and having there be something that they love about this story. I do feel a great responsibility to deliver on the things people love about this story, but at the same time, it's on stage. It's not. It's not a novel anymore. In our version of it, it's not a novel. And one of the things that a novel is really good at is narration and first-person perspective. And something that a musical is really good at is to dive into lots of different characters and make you feel for those people. And so looking at this, one of the things that I got really excited about when I was approached about it was that I'd always felt connected to Nick, which is kind of no surprise. I think most people who read the book feel connected to Nick. And I felt really distanced from not only the women in the book, who I was really fascinated by but didn't understand, but also Gatsby, who is in the book primarily a symbol. And so the opportunity to go into this story and actually try to dive into those characters and allow them to be human beings, as soon as a person walks on stage, as soon as Jeremy Jordan walks on stage and is playing the role of Jay Gatsby, he is no longer a symbol. He is a flesh and blood, unbelievably talented and like charismatic, exciting person, and you want to know more about him. And so being able to go into that, knowing that that's what a musical does well, and being able to take that and use it to, yes, deliver on the things that the book does well, that you can't do in a musical, and then also try to continue to expand and extrapolate and build into it a kind of empathy that musicals are capable of, that a novel doesn't necessarily, especially a first-person novel, doesn't give you access to. So specifically, the character of Daisy was someone that I thought was a challenge and an interesting person to dive into. And one of the things that I loved about going to a women's college was that we took a lot of texts that I took for granted when I was young. An example is Little Women. I took for granted that was the right kind of story that a young woman should read. And I had this amazing professor named Jenny Kasanoff, who I'm pretty sure also taught Greta Gerwig, because the adaptation of Little Women is really connected to the lectures that Jenny Kasanoff gave us about Little Women. But there's this ability to go back into a text that you knew when you were younger and say, wait a second, what does it actually mean? Who are these characters actually? How do I feel about these people now as an adult? And being able to go back to Daisy and look at her actual circumstances. What is it like to be a woman in 1922? What does it feel like to be a woman in 1922? What are her actual options? What is she allowed to do here? How is that similar and different from what Myrtle is allowed to do? How is it similar and different from what Jordan is allowed to do as a woman who is yet to get married? And how are they making choices in spite of the fact that they are restricted? And so that got me really excited. And that was one of the first reasons I really wanted to go into this story. And then the thing that I discovered as we started to work on it was how much we didn't know about Gatsby. Because it's called The Great Gatsby. It was a bit of a surprise to me, the degree to which he was opaque to us. We're watching him, we're obsessed with him, we're fascinated by him, but he's distanced. And being able to actually try to get into this guy's head the second that you put him on stage, and he's waiting for Daisy, he's waiting to have tea with Daisy, and he says, "Today's the day." You suddenly realize that this guy's incredibly nervous, and he is incredibly anxious, and that there's something to mine there. There's something really charming and human about that person, and it's something that we wouldn't necessarily know what to, I don't know that you would know what to call it in 1922, but now I look at him and he's a little obsessive compulsive. He might be a little on the spectrum, like his way of dealing with the world is different than other people's way of dealing with the world. And there's something beautiful in that and fascinating. And being able to go into that character and find both like the deep obsessive love he has for this woman, but then also the kind of ridiculous's of some of the situations that he's put himself into, I think is so connected to what Fitzgerald was doing with what he was writing with the novel. Because, he's got those lists of all the people who came to the parties. He's got so much satire, so much fun. There's so much playfulness in what he's written. And so you're looking for how can you do that on stage? And it's not going to be through narration. Gats, which was amazing. I don't know if any of you saw, there was a play called Gats at the Public, and it was, I think, 8 hours long, and I loved it. It was great. What they did was they recited The Great Gatsby. It was awesome. But it was only for people who want to spend 8 hours with The Great Gatsby. And I am one of those people. But not everybody is. And so trying to find something that we could do in 2.5 hours, tell this story to a wider audience, and hopefully get people to want to go back and read the book, knowing that those two things exist in parallel. They cannot be the same. They will never be the same, and they shouldn't be. And so being allowed to play in that territory, especially because it is in public domain, we're not required to do exactly what the book did, but also to be able to play with it in a way that always is paying homage to what my understanding of the intention of the author was.
Right. And so with going back to what you were saying about how Gatsby and then a lot of the other characters really are, you don't get a lot to work with in the book. Fitzgerald deliberately leaves them pretty superficial. So can you walk me through what your process was, especially going into Paper Mill, with getting to the heart of what these characters wanted and who they were?
A lot of it goes back to going to the text and looking at direct quotes that are inside the book. There's this line that Daisy has about these beautiful shirts, and I would tell somebody I was doing this adaptation, and somebody would quote a line back to me. And I sort of challenged myself anytime there was a quote, if I could put it into the show, I'd put it into the show. If Nathan, my husband who's sitting in the audience, he is the lyricist, and if he could put it into the show, we would do it. We tried to put as many Easter eggs in there as we could. And so as you look at some of those lines, they're a little bit opaque sometimes. You don't know exactly why they say them. And so trying to create a sensation of feeling that connects with the line that everybody knows, rather than, like for example, the line that I mentioned where Daisy talks about these beautiful shirts. In the book, most interpretations of the book is that she's vacuous and that she doesn't, and that she's she's enamored with the trinkets and the extravagance. She could be. I don't think that's as interesting as the alternative, which is that she is filled with an emotion that overwhelms her, and she doesn't have the words to explain what she's feeling. She doesn't know how to talk about the fact that this man disappeared 5 years ago and now is standing in front of her, and he's made this extraordinary thing, and it's confusing, and also beautiful, and also overwhelming. I think that's so much more interesting, and it was. I sort of gave it to myself as a challenge. I was like, can we have this line make people cry? Because I think it could. I think it could be beautiful, and we had a lot of lines like that. There's a line where Jordan says this kind of flipped thing about how she likes large parties, and it doesn't quite. It's a great line, but like it doesn't quite mean anything. But if you put it in the right context, it suddenly has a lot of meaning. And you start to see that the fact that she's being set up by her friend, and now she's able to be herself and be who she wants to be in this large party because nobody's looking at her. And so trying to find that way of making all of those things mean even more, or mean what they could mean, because that's what they came to mean to me as I worked on it. But that was a lot of it. It started not from research outside the text. It started from the text, and then just looking at the actual like constructs of like what was going on in 1922, and what was going, especially like for women and for people of for immigrants, for people of different classes, what was happening, and what could you and could you not get away with as a person. There was this sort of fiction of class mobility that suddenly existed in that era, but it also wasn't quite real. And so looking at those kinds of historical contexts next to the actual text of the book was where we sort of started. And then after that, deeper into the process, I started reading a lot more about Fitzgerald himself, and also about the more literary criticism.
And speaking on that criticism, how was the book received when it came out, and did Fitzgerald have any regrets about kind of how surface level he presented the female characters?
Well, it's a leading question. It didn't go well. Fitzgerald, the immediate response to the book was actually very disappointing for Fitzgerald. His first book came out, and it was wildly successful. It was considered like the book of the Jazz Age. And then this book came out, and what I didn't understand when I first started reading things about that was the degree to which it was considered to be ripped from the headlines. And there's a really interesting book by a woman named Sarah Churchwell called Careless People, where she just dives into the year 1922, which is when he set the book. And there are so many parallels, so many headlines, so many things that are related. And what I think was dismissed, one of the things that I think was dismissed, was that if you knew 1922 very well, which everyone did, who was in 1920, who was living in 1925, it looked less serious than it was, because he was doing something very satirical, and there are lots of things that have been lost on us that he was doing for that audience. But then there's all these things that were lost on them because they were just reading that it was sort of from these headlines. And I think as it zoomed backwards, he was able to, that book ended up getting a lot more traction because there's a real staying power with this story. This story is an incredibly American story. The way that it talks about class, the way that it talks about ambition, is all really fascinating. The really interesting thing is that in the 1920s, the people who were reviewing books were primarily women. And so he thought that one of the reasons he didn't get a great deal of success early on was because he didn't do a good enough job with the female characters, which was great to read because it gave me a lot of attitude and it made me feel really good about trying to flesh out those female characters. But it wasn't until World War II, when his book was sent off to soldiers who more directly related to Gatsby and Nick, that the book started gaining traction. And then it really gained traction once it was put into a lot of anthologies. A lot of those guys who were in the war ended up becoming English teachers, ended up going to become professors, and they all taught their students about this book, and then it became canonized.
And speaking of Nick, how was it having to work around the first-person perspective? Because he's really one of the first of literature's unreliable narrators, and everything you learn about these people is strictly from his point of view. So at Paper Mill especially, I know that you opened it up with Gatsby, and you had him as the first person that we see, and then as of now, it's kind of changed back to where Nick is more in the driver's seat. Why did you have Gatsby open it up, and what do you think you learned from that time being able to step outside of Nick's narration?
I think we got I didn't want to be in a first-person narrative. And I think we got really lucky because we now kind of have the best of both worlds. The thing is that the plot is driven by this man Gatsby wanting something very desperately, which is great for a musical. That's what musicals do well.
Yeah.
Better than almost any other genre. You take How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. You take Tony and West Side Story. You take there's so many musicals that are about a guy who wants a thing really badly, and they work because we hear them sing about the thing they want, and then we're like, great, go get it. So I thought it was really valuable to use that trick in this musical. And so our first version, when we went to Paper Mill, was using that to its fullest extent. It worked. You were on board, but it also created a situation where you weren't on board with the larger frame of what you had to do to tell this story that's not just about this guy, but also about the perspective on this guy and like the larger story of class. And so what we got out of that was a delicious plot framework that works really well. And then from there, we went back to the text, which is what we always did. Every time we were going to a new draft, we go back to the text. And we went back and we looked at what we wanted to bring Nick into and how we could use Nick better to frame the big idea of the story. And it's primarily like a literal framing device for us. We stay with him at the top, we stay with him at the end. He's got a really, really delicious song in the middle of the first act where he does something sort of similar. But Nick is not a driver of plot. He is an observer. And what we are also really lucky because we've got this incredible actor, Noah Ricketts, playing Nick, who is unbelievably charismatic and constantly present. And his ability to like focus and stay in the moment and react to everyone and feel those feelings for what all is happening to him. That all feels really related and helpful in that story structure.
And so last question, and then we can open it up to some questions out there. Throughout the entirety of The Great Gatsby's life, there have been so many different adaptations, interpretations. You've got all the movies, you have the other musical that's planning to open. Why do you think it's beneficial to have these many retellings of the story? And could you let me know a little bit of what is the difference between an interpretation of a work and an adaptation of a work?
I think there's a responsibility in an adaptation to try to use the form that you're in to honor the thing that you are I guess reinterpreting that, or you are adapting. And so I think that we're trying to make something that has a relationship with the text at all times. And we take that relationship very seriously. I've spent a lot of time reading about F. Scott Fitzgerald and how, God, that man left Broadway. Theater, he wanted so badly.
He was not good at it. He was really bad.
Really
Not
bad
a lost
at it.
masterpiece.
Guess what? He really liked stage directions. I'm going to tell you.
3 pages worth.
Yeah,
3 pages worth.
I'm going to tell you a funny story, which is that when I was in college, I wanted to be a novelist. And I was writing. I had a great mentor who, his name is Carol Phillips, and he called me into his office. I'd written a play, and it was the first time I'd ever written a play. But I was in his like elite fiction writing class, and he called me into his office, and he was like, "What the hell are you doing in my class?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, "You write plays. This is great. You can write plays. You can't write fiction." And then all he did for the rest rest of the year was like circle my stage directions, which was prose. But he was like, stage directions, stage directions, stage directions. So me and F. Scott Fitzgerald, completely opposite. All that F. Scott Fitzgerald did was like write prose around some dialogue.
Oh my God, with The Vegetable, which was his one attempt, like his one shot at making a play. In later interviews, he said, yeah, it's not meant to be staged, it's meant to be read.
Yeah, but the guy loved Broadway. He loved, I mean, he would be so, it's really lovely to know that he would be so excited and happy, I think, that this was happening. That's not always true. Sometimes you're like, oh God, I'm making this thing, and the author would be rolling over in their grave. I don't think that's the case here. I think you'd be so thrilled. And I think that because he wanted to feel relevant, he wanted to feel heard, and there's so much relevancy to this book and this era. And so I think that there's something really exciting about that. I think the other thing about adaptation is that it must speak to the moment that you're in when you're adapting it, in addition to speaking to the moment that it was in originally, because that's the only reason to do it. That's the only reason to continue to interact with the text, is because it's still relevant now. And so there's definitely things about what we're writing and what we are, and what we're focused on. We have a line in the first scene where Daisy mentions the Spanish flu and how 4 years might develop in 4 decades. And that's our little nod to what we've all been through in the last several years and what that felt like. And that sense of, yes, there was a war, which we all knew about, but then as we were working on it, we were like, God, we're in this same situation where they're literally coming out of these cloisters, and having that feeling of understanding what that felt like was something that was really important in that process of adaptation too, I think.
Perfect. All right, should we open it up for some questions?
If you have a question, just raise your hand. There are microphones on either side of the crowd.
Hi. I just wanted to say he absolutely would be thrilled to be on Broadway. The first adaptation of Gatsby actually opened on Broadway in 1926. In January of 1926, it was a play version by Owen Davis, who was a Pulitzer Prize winning playwright. Ding, ding. There you go. And it was, he was thrilled. He was absolutely thrilled. A friend of his sent him a telegram saying, "This is going to coin money." And he was delighted about that. He was in Europe, didn't get a chance to see the production himself, but it traveled to the provinces. The last record of it was actually in St. Paul, sometime in 1927. But what he loved best was not just straight dramatic theater, but musical theater. All the Triangle Club shows, all the Broadway shows he saw when he was a student at the Newman School, when he was a student at Princeton. And the one thing he missed most when he was in LA working on screenplays at the end of his life was being in New York City. And there are innumerable letters where he says how much he'd like to be back, how much he misses walking down Fifth Avenue, how much he misses those rows of taxis in 40s at the end of shows. So thank you so much for what you've done. I can vouch for the fact that he would be thrilled. Thank you.
And she's not going to introduce herself, but this is Anne Margaret Daniel, who compiled the 1926 play.
Any other questions?
Down here in front.
Hi, so I wanted to ask, with the book originally being from the 1920s and now writing the play or the musical nearly 100 years later, how did you keep it relevant both to the original times as well as making it relevant to now and keeping it engaging for the audience while also keeping it true to the original?
I think that anytime you're adapting something, you're picking and choosing, and you're not, you can't tell the whole story on stage. So that's part of what you're curating is connected to what feels emotional and relevant to me and to the other writers. And then we have our director, and our director Mark Bruni, and we have all of our actors. And so the thing about having a book that everyone knows is that everyone had an opinion. And so every one of those people is bringing in ideas and saying, oh, but do we need this in there? And so you're looking for those moments where you're like, okay, can I make that work too? because you're looking for what does feel juicy and meaty right now. But there's so many things. I remember being in college and starting to read the modernists, and I became pretty obsessed with modernism when I was in college because it felt relevant to the life I was living. That idea that suddenly time is expanding and contracting in the way that it was during modernism. Suddenly there are trains, there are the telecommunications suddenly happened. People were traveling across the country really quickly. People had telephones, and so things were happening really quickly for them there. All of a sudden, you had the ability to send a telegram. Everything felt fast, and it felt like it was out of control. And you also had this supreme nostalgia for the moment that you were inside of. And I think that is something that I find incredibly emotional and relevant now. And I think it's not hard for us to call that feeling up. But it's harder to talk about it now. It's harder to talk about cell phones in a nostalgic way. It's more interesting and more exciting to talk about another era and be able to feel that resonance and see that thing at a distance and dive inside of it and try and feel the feelings that you have about the moment that you're in while looking at something that's a little further away so that you have the ability to have enough distance to process it. So that's something I've been kind of focused on since I was pretty young, and I think that's I got really excited about our ability to play with that whole thing on the show. But then the thing that really, really threw me is that we started working on this. I think my first treatment for it was at the beginning of 2020. It's dated. I just sent it to you. It was dated January 20.
December 2019.
Was it?
Mm-hmm.
And the file was January 2020.
Yeah.
So that was when I sent my first treatment for we think we're going to do this to our producer. And then the pandemic happened, and we couldn't get our contracts done for about a year because first our producer he's from Korea, and so he had the pandemic happening in Korea, then it was happening in the US, then it was happening in Korea again. And so there was almost a whole year of us not sure whether or not we were doing it. Meanwhile, we're watching, I don't know if anybody saw those pictures of the Spanish flu, where everybody's got their white surgical masks on with their cigarette bowl. But we're watching that, and we know that we're probably, if theater ever came back, going to be trying to do an adaptation of The Great Gatsby. And that completely informed and changed our relationship with the book because suddenly you're looking at it not just through the lens of, oh, they're coming out of a war, the whole financial boom is about to bust, which is what history tells you, but you're suddenly like emotionally resonant. You have this resonance with it where you're like, oh, I know exactly what it feels like to be in 1922 because I'm kind of in 1922.
Anyone else?
Hi. So, in the source material, you're very much from the perspective of Nick, who, as we've mentioned, is kind of a bit of an outsider in this world. When adapting to this version that is kind of think about the themes that are very relevant, especially through the perspective of an outsider. Now having to, imagine them from this new perspective. What kind of work did you have to do to make them still as effective?
I think what's surprising about this story when you really go into all the characters is that there's only one character in the entire book who isn't an outsider. The only character who isn't an outsider is Tom. Every other person in some way, shape, or form is an outsider. So as much as you can look at it through Nick's perspective, and you should and you do, you also are looking at it from all of these other people's perspectives and looking at how that relates. You suddenly see them and their outsiderness to the situation that they're in and the choices that they've had to make in a way that Nick doesn't. And so Nick doesn't see them as outsiders, he sees them as insiders. And I think that's one of the reasons he's a little unreliable, is that he has a judgment on how inside baseball everything is. And even he sees Gatsby as an insider in some ways. and then eventually relates to him as an outsider. But I feel like there's that opening that up and allowing all of those characters to have those moments of vulnerability and like their own Achilles heels and their own sense of not feeling like they fit in the world that they're in, I think allows you to look at what Nick is saying in the book and look at what Fitzgerald is saying, but just sort of continue to like telescope that idea outward.
Time for a few more. If anyone has any more questions? No?
I have an internet question from the Instagrams.
Go for it.
The Instagram wants to know if you had access to F. Scott Fitzgerald and you could ask him anything about the book, what would it be?
Great question.
Oh, I know exactly what I would ask him. Okay, so there's this part where Daisy has a strand of pearls from Tom, and it's $300,000, and she gets some letter, and the letter it totally throws her for a loop, and she ends up in the bathtub, and she's drunk, and the letter disintegrates in her hand, and you hear this whole story from Jordan's perspective. Jordan never sees what the letter is. I don't know that the letter is from Gatsby. Hot take. I've read a lot of things. I can't find anything that says it's not from Gatsby. I find lots of people saying it is from Gatsby, but if you actually look at the text, the whole thing's about Tom. And so I'm really curious, and I keep looking for information about this, but I think that there's a world in which the letter is actually about Tom and the women that he's having affairs with. It could be, because she even says, give it back to whoever they belong to. And maybe that's just saying, give them back to Tom. Or maybe that's saying that there was another woman before her that we don't know about. And then after that, because of, in response to that letter, in response to getting married to Tom, she holds on to him so tightly after that. And so I think it's possible that all of that is more about affairs than it is about Gatsby, which changes her relationship to Gatsby and when she was focused on him. I think that she may not have been focused on him the night before the wedding to Tom, and I would be so curious to have a conversation with him about that and why he left it kind of vague. Because I looked in both editions and in the Trimalchio edition, which is the one that comes before the two editions, and there's nothing that clarifies that piece of information. The harder ones. Daisy took a little while to figure out how to musicalize, but all of them are really fun to write dialogue for. He wrote beautiful dialogue. It's all very heightened, so you have to be inside of. And once you're in the rhythm and the flow of that, it's so much fun to write.
I think we can take one more in the back there. Yeah.
Hi, is this thing on? Can you hear me?
Good.
First off, Brendon, huge fan of the YouTube channel. Great work. You're doing great. Keep doing what you're doing. Kait, I'm a huge fan of your work as a lyricist. Your work with Great Loudmouth especially really got me into off-Broadway composers as a high schooler, so I owe you a great debt for that.
Thank you.
My question is, between your work as a lyricist and your work as a playwright, do you find different creative inspirations or use different creative techniques as a lyricist versus as a playwright, or do you tend to approach the different artistic mediums in a very similar way and with the same mind?
So a really easy question.
We were just looking for notes from like scribbled notes, like handwritten notes of things that we've done on this project. And I realized I was going through all my notebooks, and I realized that when I'm writing lyrics, I spend a lot of time writing by hand, and I do a lot of drafts. But when I'm writing dialogue for a show, and I'm not writing any lyrics for the show, I tend to be more inside of like a computer document, and it's a little bit more structural, and I start from an outline, and I build out of that outline, and I kind of stay within the document that I'm working on, rather than taking lots of like side notes, which I do a ton of when I'm writing lyrics. And I didn't actually know that about myself until I went look. I was like, I must have notes in here, and I found nothing, because all of it was in all of these documents that I'd created that were like, here's the scene, here's one version, here's version 6 of the same scene, but then I move it back into the script. So I think that's kind of a little bit the way that it feels different to me. I really like writing either book or lyrics. It's something that I discovered kind of late. I used to write a lot of book and lyrics together, but I love collaborating. I love collaborating with composers, but I also love collaborating with lyricists, and I love collaborating with playwrights. And so it's really, really fun to be able to go back and forth with a words person and say, here's an idea, and then have them take it for a little while, and then send it back to me and say, here's what I came up with, and try to like continue to build something with somebody. So I think that's something that I've discovered as a writer that is a similarity. It doesn't matter. I don't really mind if I'm the lyricist or the book writer in a lot of situations. But I love the back and forth. As long as you love the people that you're working with and you think they're incredible. It's really nice to work with my husband. He's very good at what he does. And we know each other so well. And during the pandemic it was especially nice because we were able to, not binge another TV show, as we said, and instead work on this.
Well, what a great question to end on.
Yay.
Thank you both. Let's give them another applause.